My name is Jen. I don't know why the lighting now looks completely different than it did before. That is weird. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm losing my mind. That's always possible. Hey folks, it's me, Jen. My name is Jen. Here we are. It's the second thing I'm filming today. I am working on a project, so I'll have to do that. I'm working on projects. I'm multitasking for this video, and probably will be in the future because it's the busiest time of year. I'm working on projects. I wanted to do videos at the same time because I want to continue making stuff for you guys, but I need to also multitask or else I'm going to go into an anxious fucking bubble of insanity if it feels like I'm not being productive enough. So I'm painting this birdhouse. I've pretty much done most of what I need to. I don't think I'm gonna be able to reach those other spots. So we're gonna move on to painting the base. So, okay, here we go. So other than me doing this basically right now, I wanted to also be able to do a little video. It's been a little bit since I've done a recommendations video. I do have another recommendations video planned that will hopefully be going up next month, but I wanted to do something a little bit seasonal-ish. To everyone, you know, currently it's probably the end of fall, even though technically the beginning of winter doesn't start until like the winter solstice isn't until like the 20th, 21st of December, but everyone I think generally accepts that once December 1st hits, it's winter. Hello. So part of this recommendation is probably going to be a little bit late in the game, but here we are. I've done fall book recommendations before. I know 100% that I've done that, but I don't think I've done winter book recommendations, and I actually have a combination of the two spread out in stacks in front of me. A couple of suggestions for like fall, late fall aesthetically. Then I've got a bunch here that are, I think, embody both the fall and the winter, the darkness at the end of the year, all that jazz. And then I have some winter specific suggestions as well. And I'm also gonna pull up my Goodreads because there's a couple of books that I know 100% I'm going to completely forget to mention, and that's going to drive editing me of the future crazy later, and we don't want to do that to her. So first books that I can really, I think, suggest for you, which are more fall specific books, or maybe fall books that I feel like are kind of definitely give me that fall vibe, but also, like I said, that kind of transition into the end of the year, a little bit darker. I can't remember what I suggested for my fall reads before. I think I might have a repeat on there for this, so I won't go into like my standard I think recommendations, which is a lot of like Halloween related things, because that's already passed, but just focusing on like I said, that kind of end of the year feeling. I would, I think, first suggest The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, which I just finished. And I think it kind of embodies this time of the year just because of how, like, aesthetically eerie it is. It is dealing with a man who acts as a phantom. He has like hidden passages. He a little bit, I think he's a little bit disfigured, which is like, that's its own thing, but I think what's scariest about him, other than the fact that people are like horrified by him, the scariest thing about him, I think, are the masks that he chooses to wear. They just look kind of, honestly, I think a lot more terrifying than what he actually looks like. But the whole thing has like that kind of eerie, dramatic feel to it. It takes place in it takes place in like dimly lit areas, dimly lit graveyards, and underneath the opera house, where shadows are long, and what moves in them may or may not be a shadow. It might be a phantom, it might be a man who's kind of a psychopath, that whole thing. And it's like, I think it's very deliciously eerie for this time of year, because even though we've passed Halloween, the tradition of ghost stories and stuff like that was still very popular at one time at Christmas, and like the end of the year thing, and I know for the most part, at least here in the US, I think, I couldn't speak for Europe and like the rest of the world, because I honestly don't know. But at least here, I don't think for the most part we do the whole ghost story thing, like that most wonderful time of the year. Scary ghost stories. That's one of the lines. Scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. And I think for the most part we don't do ghost stories around the holidays anymore, except for maybe partaking in the Christmas Carol. I just think that it is kind of nice to have that scary, eerie feeling to it at the end of the year. And I know that it's a topic that's been brought up before on this podcast that I like to listen to, called She Done It. And the host, Caroline, talks or has talked before about like how popular mysteries, especially like murder mysteries and like Agatha Christie specifically and things, they get very popular around the holidays. And it's like this kind of effect, I think, that people tend to like reading about something maybe a little bit darker when it's like a happy time of year, because it's like the balance of it or something. The juxtaposition of the two is, I forget the whole like explanation, but it's kind of pleasing, the melding of the two together. Of course, it's also, like I said, that the end of the year, the solstice, is the shortest day of the year, and we're surrounded by darkness, but the light is returning kind of deal. I don't know, I feel like naturally people kind of move to the cycles, even if we don't as a people do that much anymore. I think naturally things that we still tend to do, little quirks and things, are us still trying to relate to the turning of the seasons kind of thing. I don't know, I'm gonna sound like a wackadoo, but anyway. Along those lines of reading about murder and shit during the fall and towards the end of the year, I would recommend also the complete Sherlock Holmes. Really, any Sherlock Holmes stories. I have, because they were at Barnes & Noble, I have the complete, like, this is just volume 1. I have volume 2, but honestly, I think that reading any Sherlock Holmes, not necessarily like a full collection, but any of his books around this time of year is kind of good. It's got that very some of them are a little more eerie, but it's like a puzzle, and it's nice to feel like you can sit and read these and read in front of an open fire. If you don't have an open fire, read in front of a candle, or even if you don't have that ability, you just kind of, you become immersed in the tale itself, and it feels like you're there in 221B Baker Street, sitting in the corner having tea, or be there with Watson as he listens to Holmes deduce things. I just think it has like a very nice autumnal and winter feel to it, because you can be cozy reading Holmes's exploits as he kind of wanders across the cold, bleak, muddy, terribly like coal polluted London town. So yeah, also, like I said, it's that kind of time of the year thing of, for some reason, we like reading about murder around the holidays. Another one that I would recommend, which it may or may not also end up on my manga recommendations. I really I really have to think about it a little bit more if it's like a good newbie. I mean, I have to take into account, I have to think a little bit more about whether or not this is a good newbie manga, or if you should have read stuff before. But if you are interested in manga and you like it, and you haven't read Nasume's Book of Friends, I think this is a very nice kind of, I don't think it necessarily takes place in the fall, but I think it has that kind of nice, cozy fall feeling to it. It's got ghosts and spirits, because this is about a teenage boy named Natsume who is cursed or gifted, depending on how you look at it, with seeing yokai, which are basically like those spirits and demons that are in Japan, where he lives. And yeah, he has the ability to see all of this, and he has never, because of this, he has never been able to really fit in anywhere, and people seem to think that he like is kind of cursed, and like he's been kind of shuffled around between family all the time. And currently, in these books, he has moved again, and he is staying with, I can't remember if they're actually like long distance cousins of his or if they're like family friends, but a like middle-aged couple who have taken him in, and he's kind of reserved now because of everything that he's gone through with everything that he sees, and also dealing with all of this. And you know, he's kind of very troubled, and he is now back in the town though where his grandmother grew up, and his grandmother actually is who he inherited this gift from, because she could also see and interact with the yokai. So he finds actually that when his grandmother, I'm gonna mess up her name, Raiko, was about his age, she bound names of like a bunch of demons into this book. She called it a Book of Friends, and having their names is like powerful. So she has all of this, and it basically, by doing this, she enslaved them. And now that like Natsume has this book, the yokai are coming back to claim their names and fight him, basically. And he has a different outlook than his grandmother had on things. He doesn't want to fight with anyone, and he is a little bit more willing to give their names back to them. And I think this this might feel like a weird recommendation, I guess, for the fall months, but I think it's just because of the coziness of the series. Mind you, I've only read the first 4 books. I think this is like a 20 some odd book series, but it's like a high priority series to finish for me because I love it so much. The anime actually is what I've seen the most of, and it is the cutest, sweetest thing, with a really awesome soundtrack. But I really think that the cozy feel of it is perfect for like kind of fall, just because it has, like I said, that cozy feel to it, and it's also just very heartwarming for this time of year as well, because it is Natsume going to a place where he has deep roots and he is making connections. He's trying to connect to a grandmother he didn't know. It's a little bit twisted. He is trying to connect to these family members who they desperately, they like actually care about him, and they actually want him around, and it's like he's trying to cope with that because it just seems like he hasn't had that experience ever. So that's also very heartwarming to see him connecting with them, to actually making friends in the town, and also to be able to have a very different relationship with the yokai than his grandmother had with them. And it's such a heartwarming, yeah, series, so I think it's like also perfect for this time of year. Speaking of heartwarming, moving into the stack of books that I have that are a good, like, fall/winter read because they're good transitions between the months, basically. A couple of books of Howard Frank Mosher's. One that I could suggest is A Stranger in the Kingdom by Howard Frank Mosher. Now, his books are predominantly, actually I think all, well, no, not all of them. I have another one of his books that kind of takes place across the country. But for the most part, his books are set in Vermont, and set in Vermont in the past. Like this one in particular is set in, what is the year? 1952. So yeah, so this is set over the course of 1952, maybe into 1953, and this is in a small town in like northern Vermont, like close up against the Canadian border. Very small town full of very quirky characters, very odd people, and it's kind of like a coming of age story. A lot of his books are kind of coming of age, but this one is part coming of age story and part murder mystery, because we are dealing with a very small town which is reeling from a brutal murder of a young woman, and unfortunately the town's new preacher, who recently moved like a few months before, is a black guy, and this is the 1950s, and him and his teenage son are basically the only black people in the area because it's rural Vermont in the 1950s, and unfortunately there is, not everyone, but there is an unfortunate faction of very racist assholes that would rather none of them be there. So the town is also dealing with that, like trying to be welcoming to the new preacher while at the same time dealing with like the assholes in their community, and then this murder happens. And unfortunately, due to the preacher having tried to help this young person who was murdered, he is suspected of her murder. Also, he's an outsider, so everything kind of comes together, and it's like this very intense trial that is, it's kind of a look at this pocket of time in this community and the town. It's almost like this trial is like, it's not really about the murder, it's more about this man being on trial for more of who he is than whatever he's suspected for. And it's also the kind of thing that's like will determine the soul of the town, basically. Are they really a bunch of prejudiced assholes? Are what? It's a lot, but it's also really good. I think this might have been the first Howard Frank Washer book I read. It might have been Northern Borders. Northern Borders is also my fall to winter book suggestion as well, because it has that kind of feel to it. It is also a coming of age story. It's in the same general area in rural Vermont in the 1950s, but it's actually a little bit slightly further north, and it is involving way different characters. Similar-ish characters that you see, but the main focus is different characters, like members of a different family. But it is about a boy who, his mom died, and his dad, it's the 50s, so it's like single dad situation, which is weird. But then they also have, he has the possibility of being able to go to a really good school in the future if he attends the local academy where his grandparents live. And so he is basically given to his grandparents, and they raise him. So it's following him from the age of like 6 until he's about 17, 18. And it's just kind of following him as he grows up in rural Vermont with his grandparents. And I absolutely adore that. And it goes throughout all the seasons, but I think it very much embodies like fall, and it just feels like fall and winter. Like I said, it's all the seasons, but it kind of has that feel to it. Very cozy, very sweet, very funny, very full of quirky people, but at the same time there's also a darker side to it. There's like darker elements underneath, more unsettling things kind of happening in the background. And yeah, it's a good read. Continuing on with the fall to winter transition book recommendations. So y'all knew this was coming, but The Shining by Stephen King. I mention it probably way too much. I mention it like I'm getting paid to mention it. I mention it like I would give my firstborn child to meet the author. That's how much I mention this book. It is up there on my favorites. I think The Shining is one of those books that people for the most part kind of know what's going on in it, because people for the most part have probably seen the movie. So you get the gist of it, even though there's a lot that happens in the book, and a lot more that's gone into in the book than in the movie adaptation. But The Shining is one of those books that's it's a good transitional book between fall to winter, because it takes place from fall to winter, and also it's got the creepy vibe for the fall, and then you have the fact that the Torrance family get snowbound at the Overlook Hotel up in Colorado, where they are caretakers for it during the off-season. And, snowbound. Love a good book about being snowbound. Don't like that experience, but a book about it is pretty good. So yeah, this is about that experience and the inhabitants of the Overlook Hotel, who are not just the living members of the Torrance family. So always a good recommendation for this time of year. Another good fall to winter one, and this one might seem weird, I suppose, but if you are in the mood for a book that's like a little bit melancholic, I suppose, even when there are bits of it that are quite amusing, but overall the feel of the book in between those amusing bits is a bit bleak, if you will. Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I know this is a hard sell because this is a mammoth, but I feel like this is even though I read this in like, what, September? Well, I read it in like, what, August to September, and I mean, you could probably pick it up at any time of the year, but I think it's a good, like, fall to winter transitional book because, like I said, of how bleak it is. There is that kind of melancholic air to the tale, which follows several people at the heart of a law case or surrounding this law case. So it is like a story woven together between a whole cast of characters. There is an inspector with the police. There is a poor chimney sweep. There are random, like, lawyers. There is a old man who takes in his young cousins, who are wards of the court, and he takes in this young woman and young man because they are embroiled on opposite sides in this very complicated court case that's been going for like 100 years or so. And then there's also another ward of the court named Esther, who is one of the main narrators of the tale, and her parentage has been kind of a secret to her. And yeah, she's been like going around as an orphan and a ward of the court, and also ends up in this man's house as his housekeeper and a companion for the other young people in his home. And they're all their stories, plus a varying cast of quirky characters in the aristocratic drawing rooms to the poorest of slums in London. They're all kind of intermingled, their tales with each other, and it's Bleak House. It is kind of bleak. There's a lot of it that has that feel to it, which is, I don't know, I think it's like the perfect kind of aesthetic for the end of the year, I guess, when things, even when things are so, you know, typically merry with like the holidays coming up and stuff like that, that it's also a time that can be a bit depressing. You know, if you are someone who deals with seasonal depression, or, you know, it's just the end of, you reach the end of another year, which is part of, I love the holiday season, but besides being very stressed out at the time, I also tend to get a little bit, maybe why I dive so hard into the holidays is because it's the time of year when I tend to be the most melancholic and feel the most sad, I guess. So I would say that maybe it's not the most holly and jolliest of books to read about now, but the aesthetic for this time of year is on point, with this book because a lot of it is pretty intense, because this is basically like was Dickens trying to take apart the flawed and broken system, basically, society and all of its messy bits, as well as the law, the justice system being broken, and like he was trying to kind of take on that kind of thing. And while those parts are bleak and not everybody ends happily, there is also, I think, a fairly... Oh my gosh, what? Oh, sorry, we have a stink bug in here. I just got startled. Hi, stink buddy. So, like, because a large part of this is indeed kind of bleak, at the same time there's a hopeful tone to it, and I think that the humor in here is also pretty delightful as well. So if you are going for melancholia interspersed with humor for this time of the year, I think that this is a good one for now. It is a chunky boy, so, you know, proceed with caution. Something else I could recommend for fall and winter, but this actually works for any time of year. Poetry of Robert Frost. The man wrote a lot, and he wrote a lot about each season. So yeah, I would recommend most definitely his poetry for the time of the year. It really gets you into the feel of each season, the feel of the changing of seasons, the passing of time. I mean, this is his, you know, collected poems, so there's a lot more going on than just that in here. The most classic ones for this time of year, I think, are in here. Like, let me see, I believe Apple Picking's in here, and then October, The Road Not Taken, Christmas Trees, An Old Man's Winter Night, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. That's a classic. That's one that I think everybody thinks of around the winter time. Yeah, so like a lot of different poems that are kind of good to look at around this time of year too, if you just want something a little bit lyrical that is mostly about nature, but also has like underlying things going on as well. So if you want like seasonal poetry, I think this is a pretty good one for that. Literally fall to winter. You could pick up the Small Spaces series by Catherine Arden. This is a middle grade horror quartet that follows each of the seasons, and it is following Ollie and her friends. As they are continuing to deal with creepy shenanigans happening in their Vermont. Creepy shenanigans and things happening around them in Vermont. The first book is Small Spaces. It takes place in the fall. I also recently talked about this in my favorite horrors of all time video. If you're interested in that at all, this is one of my favorite books of all time. Absolutely love it. Cozy, heartwarming, heartbreaking, creepy as shit. Like, this is a middle grade series. There's some chilling pieces in here. So yeah, Small Spaces takes place in the fall. And then book 2 is Dead Voices, and this takes place in the winter, and I don't know 100% for certain if a couple scenes in this were supposed to be paying homage to The Shining, but it definitely felt like it when I was reading it. And this one, personally, I actually found even more chilling than the first book. Because there are a couple of things that are in here that are things that are irrational fears of mine, and they are done perfectly in here. So yeah, actually irrational fears is a really good way of describing some of the creepier elements in this series. But these are perfect for the fall and winter, and then the other two books in the series take place in the spring and summer. But this is a good series overall, but these are just the particular books for fall and winter that I could really recommend. I'm kind of thinking to myself that maybe I want to try to reread this in the winter and just maybe read all of them in the season that they were set in. I don't know. As far as like straight up winter books, like books definitely for the winter that I can recommend. One of them that I could recommend, I'm just trying to bring up my Goodreads again. One of them that I could recommend if you've never read this, or if you're feeling nostalgic for it perhaps, is 101 Dalmatians. And this is by Dodie Smith, right? Yes, Dodie Smith. So this was written in 1956, and to be fair, it shows it. It's a little bit outdated, but if you want a nice wintry story that a chunk of it takes place right around like Christmas time, if you want that kind of read, that's really good for it. Also, if you've loved 101 Dalmatians at all, when I was growing up, next to The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, 101 Dalmatians was, and for the most part still is, one of my favorite Disney movies. So I would say that if you really loved 101 Dalmatians, you should definitely read that. It's more closer to the original Disney, like, animated version, you know, the one where they had the Cruella de Vil song, which is, like, one of my favorite villain songs of all time. But, yeah, if you're interested in that, it's also really good. It, of course, differs from the book because Disney, like, does not stick with their source material that carefully, but it has elements that are very similar to the book, and then it veers off. The book goes way more in depth in, like, the characters and stuff, although the people are a bit different. You don't really hear as much about them as you do in the movies. You definitely spend most of your time with the animals, which is perfectly delightful. It's very British, and that's, if you like that kind of writing, you'll love that. Another book that I really like for the winter is one that I actually read not last year. It was in 2021. It was The Girl Who Speaks Bear, and it is by Sophie Anderson, and it takes place in a small village somewhere in Russia, and it is following a young girl who's a little bit different, and she was like adopted when she was younger, because this woman who lives on the edge of the village near the woods, she discovered this young girl named Yanka. She found her in a bear cave, and so she adopted her. And Yanka is really strong. She is the strongest person in the village, pretty much, and that kind of sets her apart. She desperately likes to belong, but she also kind of stands out, and she continuously feels drawn to the woods. And one morning she wakes up and discovers that her legs have been transformed into bear legs. And she knows that at that point she has to leave the village and go into the woods and try to figure out what is happening to her. It is so wintry. Actually is, I think, the perfect winter read because the food described in it is very warming and delicious. Actually, there's a cookie in there that is talked about, and I wanted to eat it so bad I found a recipe for it and made it that year for the holidays, and it takes a lot of work, but oh, delicious. So good. Food writing, I don't know if anyone else feels this way around the holidays. I'm assuming so because the holidays are very like food filled, but when it comes to the holiday season, the majority of what I think about, besides what I need to do and oh hey, this is a fun thing, food. I think about food for a large part, and I think the food writing in that book is wonderful. There's like a big found family thing going on that's wonderful, and the setting itself, the snowy village and the snow-covered woods, and it's just, oh, it's really beautiful. It also has fairy tale elements to it. It's such a good book for the winter. Of fairy tale elements to books, I guess. I could also, it's been years, honestly, since I've read this series. So, like, I don't think I've read this since I was, like, maybe 12 or 13. But The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis is a classic. It used to be book 1. I believe it's now considered book 2. Because, I think The Magician's Nephew is now considered book 1. Chronologically speaking. Because it has to do with the beginnings of Narnia. Whereas this is after Narnia has already been formed. But I think that while the other books, while you could read the other books, I don't think you could read them as a standalone. I think you would be kind of lost here and there if you read them as standalones, whereas The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I think is the book that you could read as a standalone, like that would be okay. I don't think you'd be, again, take this with a grain of salt because this has been forever since I read this, but I think you can read this as like a standalone would be fine. In fact, I'm pretty sure that if no one has read the entire series, they've at least read this one. I really love this book from what I remember. I loved the movie when it came out. I loved the world that was created, the characters, the food, although I will say Turkish Delight is very disappointing. It sounded so good when I was a kid and I tried it as an adult and it tastes like crap. So I don't know what people were thinking, but it's not good. I wouldn't risk anything to eat Turkish Delight, to be completely honest. But it's a good world. If you like Doctor Who, one of the Christmas specials takes a big page from Chronicles of Narnia. I loved. But yeah, I think this is like also a pretty good little fantasy read to revisit during the winter because it has that good setting, and yeah, it's also a fairly quick read. A couple of books, like I mentioned, mysteries and like Agatha Christie are like really popular for this time of year. One of them that's really like good really at this time of year is Murder on the Orient Express, which is a Hercule Poirot mystery, and it of course takes place on a snowbound train. Poirot is heading back he was going to take a break after a case and then gets an urgent message that he has to go back to help with something else. So he ends up hopping onto this train, which then ends up being snowbound, and then in the middle of the night, an unsavory character on board is murdered, and everyone on board the snowbound train is now a suspect, and Poirot is on the case. Love it. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It's also one of my favorite Poirot, one of my favorite books by Agatha Christie ever. I absolutely love it. The deduction, Poirot, just the setting itself, that feeling of being like stuck in one place and you can't get out. Like, it's not really claustrophobic though, because there's so much happening. You're trying to figure out everybody's stories, and is everyone lying? Who's lying? What's going on? Also, like I said before, that idea of reading about murder around a pretty standard, joyful time of year, it's like there's something about it psychologically that is like pleasing. And along those lines, there's also Midwinter Murder, which is a collection of mysteries, so like short story contained mysteries that are all set either on or around Christmas time or during the winter. So like very wintry, snowy kind of setting and everything. It has one of my favorite shorts of hers in here, which is Three Blind Mice, which the play The Mousetrap was based off of. There's also, I think, a couple of Mr. Quinn mysteries in here, which the Mr. Quinn ones are really good. So, yeah, this is a good cozy read for this time of the year as well. I'm actually hoping to maybe reread this in December. I know I'm going to reread both of these during the winter anyway. I just don't know if it'll be in December or not. And then, of course, the last wintry book that I can really recommend is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. You've probably heard me talk about this a lot. You're probably going to hear me talk about it a lot more. This is also one of my favorite books of all time. I think it is the perfect winter tale. It has the most beautiful descriptions that I have ever read in my life. It has creepy parts. There are ghosts. There is humor. There are very interesting characters. Like I said, the descriptions are beautiful. And the way that Dickens is able to make you feel like you're like right there in the middle of everything. Oh, beautiful. And the food, you guys. The food described, oh my god, it makes me hungry. So good. It also had that, like, if you want to have some feelings, you read this book. I can't read this book without crying at least one point in it. It has like a lot of emotions in here. You can get angry, you'll get a little sad, you'll have your heart warmed all the way through your body. It is, I love this, and I love the message of it, and just everything about this. I think, like, I know Bleak House, there's like a thing on it, there's a couple of places on it that are like, this is Dickens' masterpiece. And I mean, I read it and I loved it, and I will say, I think that's him at his top game. Like, really beautifully done. But I would argue that this story that he wrote it off, and but I don't know if he really, I know he would perform it at different points in his life and stuff, but I don't know what his ultimate thoughts of it were, but I would argue that this is actually his masterpiece, because I think this is the timeless one. This is the one that people keep adapting. This is the one that's so fucking good. And like I said, timeless and packs a powerful punch and like beautiful. So yeah, if you've never actually read Christmas Carol, you've only ever seen the adaptations, I would encourage you, please pick up A Christmas Carol. It is so beautiful, and I feel like I haven't seen all of the adaptations, but the one I've seen so far that hits it the closest, I guess, to the original would be the animated one with Jim Carrey playing Scrooge. But it's also a very weird adaptation. The book is still, I don't know, there's just something about it that is so good. It's so beautiful. I think it's the most accessible of his works, not only because the topic is more easily accessible with how he writes it, but it's also, like I said, really funny. It's got a little bit of a ghost story. It's a redemption story, and it's also really short. Like, depending on your copy, I guess depends on how many pages this is, but this copy that I have right here, I honestly have a couple of copies. This one is 81 pages. So, yeah, it's very easily, quickly readable. So yeah, those are my fall to winter-ish book recommendations. I hope you guys enjoyed. I feel like I talked forever. Sorry, guys. I hope that you enjoyed anyway. I hope you guys are having a wonderful, whatever you're having, day, evening, week, weekend, whatever. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you are new here and would like to consider subscribing, please do so. And I will see you guys in the next video.